Hello there, and welcome to Fixing the Sequel Trilogy, the Writers' Room podcast dedicated to fixing the Star Wars sequels. I'm Bryce Quinn, and this week I'm joined by permanent guest, Forfang Phan.
Hello, new co-host of the show here.
Yeah, permanent co-host. Thanks for joining us, as always, Cole.
Thank you for having me.
I'm also joined by the child of Chinchilla, the Outback Spectacular himself, Carmelo Keating. How are you, Mello?
That's great. I feel like there's a copyright issue there.
Definitely not. No one knows.
No one knows Outback Spectacular.
That's a specifically Australian reference to make.
No, I'm great. Oh, I love that. That's such a
Specifically
glowing...
Queensland reference to make too, I think. Yeah.
What a glowing like sort of title. I love it.
This is Fixing the Sequel Trilogy, and our mission is to rewrite the sequels start to finish and document our progress here in audio form. This week, we're talking heady stuff, the bane of writers the world over, themes and messaging. No?
Did you say heady stuff?
Heady stuff, like heady, like thought-provoking.
Oh, cool.
Big
Cool.
head.
What did you think?
Big brain. No, I wasn't sure. I was like, Hetty's also like a nickname.
Anyways, the themes and messages of Star Wars are something that have been analyzed and pulled apart 100 times over, and today it's our turn. Let's start at the start where it all began with Episode 4, A New Hope. I thought that'd be a good place to start.
No, that's
so
good.
we wanted
That's
to do original trilogy and then prequel trilogy. And I just realized I didn't tell you that.
No, that's okay. Well, no, let's start with things that have good themes and messages, then backtrack to the prequels, try and get through that, and then get to the sequels.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. So I've got my notes. You've got your notes. Cole, I think you've got notes.
Yeah.
Done actually a little bit of prep work for this because it's kind of important.
I love
Okay,
themes.
now everyone
Now
shoot.
We're gonna point and shoot.
Yeah.
And the last one standing is gonna do their themes
Bang.
first.
Okay, cool.
I think you, Mello.
Last one standing?
I shot you.
Oh, I'm
You
dead.
shot me.
You're dead. Cole, you're
I
up.
naturally live. All right, where do we begin? So a lot of the themes I talk about at least in my notes, are sort of all encompassing because obviously with the trilogies they do have a message. But I think with Episode 4, to go on this idea of good versus evil and light and dark, I will start off by saying Episode 4 is all about a black and white morality of good and evil. Because ignoring Episode 5, before that ever came out, you had Darth Vader, the Empire, the Death Star,
And it was one film.
Exactly.
So the message in the theme is all. It is kind of like it starts. And
Exactly
finishes,
right. So you only had this core message of good versus evil, this young farm boy who rises up against the Empire. And that's the way it seems. But we'll get onto that later about what the true message of Star Wars is. Now, good versus evil, what do you guys think about that?
Oh yeah,
It's like-
absolutely. That's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah,
what I
yeah.
landed
exactly.
One of the
on.
most common themes in all of Star Wars, and that started in A New Hope.
It's the one everyone points out. And obviously, hero's journey as well.
Yeah.
Young boy rises
But I
to...
don't think it's a coming of age story.
No, I
It's
agree.
a good versus evil story
Yeah.
and maybe a tale of courage as well, but not a coming of age story.
Yeah, and I think if you were to look at it over the course of the trilogy, that's about growing up and maturing.
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
same with the Anakin and the prequels, but maybe not not just in that one film.
Yeah.
like he's got a lot of growing to do beyond that one film.
Yeah.
so.
Although I would like to ask on that point, why don't you think it's a coming of age film?
Because I did a little bit of research, like the most lazy amount that I could, and I found a handy writer's list of themes and subcategories within those themes. And it's like tales of power, tales of society, tales of good and evil, tales of love versus hate, and tales of coming of age. And looking at the things in coming of age, it is very much about like family and growing up and overcoming the challenges that come with adulthood, like moving from childhood into adulthood. And it's often a very worldly human story within our human world society. And I don't think Luke Skywalker's journey falls into that whatsoever.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I
Well,
definitely...
even not whatsoever, but just very
Yeah,
little
yeah.
does it overlap there.
Yeah, because I mean, I agree. Like the focus of the film isn't really on just Luke's maturing. Although I think there are certain aspects, like obviously he loses his family that he knows.
Yeah, true.
And when we see him at the start of the film, he is very naive and young, and he wants to go see the universe for himself.
Yeah.
But then he's thrust into this role of responsibility, which I suppose can be viewed as a coming of age.
And that's why I look at a courage story instead.
Mm.
So, and that falls into something that the example given was The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And it's like a young hero thrust into an adventure, and that hero must kind of just do the thing, as opposed to really inwardly reflect and introspect. So it kind of falls into basic storytelling fundamentals, and we've talked about this before, but it's based on mythical epic stories where a young dirt farmer meets a wizard and overcomes great evil. Like that's very much the core foundation of this story and what Lucas was inspired to write in a modern sense in space. But yeah. Mello, you want to jump in?
Yeah, cool. I've got a few on, obviously hope triumphing specifically over doubt and, the feeling of hopelessness, good versus evil, found family,
Yes.
very much they find this is their group, sacrifice for the greater good.
Yes.
In the case of, Obi-Wan specifically.
Yeah.
And then stuff to do with the Force, depending on how you take it, I think it could be, genuine trust in the higher power itself, or the more human one of the belief in yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took that in a different direction, and starting with hope, but moving in a sort of different direction with it. So good overcoming evil and war eventually giving way to peace and prosperity. So it's hope that those things will happen and take place.
Yep.
Luke specifically looking into the distance, hoping for something more. Like that is like the one of the best shots ever of him looking at the suns.
Iconic.
And then the Death Star being defeated by a 1 in a million shot with the only guidance being the Force. And getting to that point, I arrived at like, I think maybe the Force is like just the embodiment of hope.
Yeah.
As opposed to maybe like a direct analogy to actual real world faith. It is a way to kind of like inspire and give hope. And that's kind of where I landed with
cool.
it.
Yeah, well, I'd like to add on to that as well, because I think like the whole notion of the Force, the idea that shot is whether or not it's faith in some greater power or
It is
faith in
a
itself.
personal desire
Yeah.
to want to go out and achieve something and hoping for something more. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Luke's trust in the Force, it's both, because like all life is a part of the Force in the universe, and by believing in himself, he's believing in this greater cause, this greater notion of interconnectedness with everyone.
And I think I want to just grab that point and just say this is why this episode is going to be a bit weird, is because it can be all of those things and it can be one thing, because
all
themes
interpretation.
and messages are about interpretation, and we've written our notes and they're separate, but we're all like already coming to different conclusions and different understandings of it, just trying to like put this art that has been around for so long and has inspired so many people into simple words on a note so that we can express it to an audience. It's going to be tricky, so bear with us.
Yep.
It's going to be a lot of these kind of
film-bro
conversations.
episode.
It's going to be a film episode, but
Well-
I love this stuff, so I'm going to do
Same
it.
here.
Well, I think right now that presents us with an interesting opportunity to clash. What do we think the message of A New Hope specifically is?
Ooh, just like if we wanted to really
Just
narrow it
I've
down.
gone each film has its what the
Ah,
message
see,
of
I
each
did not
film
do
is.
that. I
Right.
went broad trilogy, so
fair.
I'm curious to hear what you guys say.
Well, this was a theme I forgot to mention, but I think to sum up the message of A New Hope, it's small groups can rise up against great powers.
Yep.
So yeah, and even like not even just groups, small concepts, small ideas, small things. Like Luke, he's a farm boy, ends up destroying the Death Star, the biggest space station, bigger than a moon. So I think that's the encapsulation.
I've got it. Here's just something that I didn't do this earlier, so this is like off the cuff, but
go
I
on.
think the smallest of hopes can overcome the greatest of odds. That's
Yeah,
my
cool.
thing.
I think actually no, we all said it in very similar ways. I said as long as you have hope and community, anything is possible.
No, fantastic. Yeah, there we go. We've solved it, everyone.
It's the sequel
That's
trilogy.
A New Hope.
That's A New Hope. Yep, we
Don't,
solved that.
Don't try to interpret it in any
Not
other
something
way.
that people have been interpreting and analyzing for literally 30, 40 years since the fucking movie came out.
Thank you, Joseph Campbell.
So look how good we are at this. No, that's just what we've arrived at just now. So let us know if you disagree, because there's so much that you can pull from any piece of art. And I think especially something like this, even if it is a family adventure film, it's something that really does hold a special place in so many people's hearts, especially like those first original trilogy movies. So anyway,
Okay.
shall we move on a little bit?
Empire.
Empire. This one gets more tricky. I love Empire.
Yes, I love
So
Empire. It's my favorite Star Wars film.
Wow.
Now, when I mentioned black and white morality in episode 4, I think episode 5 is an answer to that.
Yeah.
It's the fact that someone like Luke, who has this very clear vision of the world and the morals within it, is forced to confront with all his beliefs being torn apart, and that the world is much more ambiguous than he thought, with case in point being Darth Vader being his father.
Yes. So that courage that he learnt in the first film that led him to overcome great odds. He's like, yes, if I just do the thing, if I go out and set my mind to something, I can achieve anything.
Yeah,
It's
things
like
are not
that
as
works for the
clear-cut.
first movie, and then the second movie, it's like, hey, new lesson. You can't just run headfirst into everything.
Yeah, exactly. And, in order to become a real hero, you have to let go of your very clear-cut beliefs.
My one's, looking into stuff of like, recklessness and maturing, trust in the higher power and trust in yourself versus more so in this film compared to the first one, the lack of trust and lack of belief. And then with our B story, that love is worth fighting for. We can't forget
B story there with Han and Leia.
Han and
Yeah.
Leia, yeah.
Yeah, well, you don't defeat evil by hating it. You do
Oh
it
my
by
God.
loving.
No, we're not there
saving
yet.
it.
I mean,
Yeah.
hey, look, we're going to get there, and it's unavoidable that we talk about that. But anyway, yes.
I think we
yeah.
really start diving into family in this film a lot more than the first one, and like the complexities of family and how like you can just have these simple good versus evil stories, but at the same time you can also have complex stories where the answers are not so simple. And Yoda is a really great and like metaphor for that, or just like a character to drive that idea. And then Vader as well, he also drives that idea with that whole epic confrontation where he cuts off Luke's hand and says, "I am your father." It's like, how are you supposed to interpret that?
Yeah, and I think it's that whole notion of ambiguity and everything. I mean, like one big thing in the film is just appearances can be deceiving, right?
Yes.
Like firstly, Yoda's introduced as this great warrior that Luke's searching for, and there's just this little green guy who's like hitting my robot.
Get her out of here. Let me
Exactly
find this warrior.
right.
Do you know where the warrior is?
Yeah, and then like the next notion, Lando, he's this old friend, but he turns out to be untrustworthy and betrays them. But then he's a good guy.
Even just physically, Boba Fett and the Millennium Falcon, and that scene where they are disguised as trash and flying
Yeah,
away like that. That's
exactly.
even like
Yeah.
a physical manifestation of that in the film as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and the worm.
Yeah.
Where they go into the asteroid
Yeah, and the
field
worm
and
comes
the
out.
worm comes out. Yeah, I'd never really considered it before, but there's so many things that kind of fit into that.
Exactly. It's all very cohesive.
Man, Empire Strikes Back. It's a good
So
film.
good.
It's a good film.
It's great.
Yes.
The deepest Star Wars film?
The
Would we
deepest
say?
Star Wars film, do we think?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
personally think it's Revenge of the Sith, and
Yeah.
we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
But we can debate that as
Yeah,
well.
I would say that Episode 5, feels like it has the most cohesive, well executed depth to it.
Well executed, I definitely
Yes,
agree.
I agree. It's like a perfect film. I always bring it up as an example.
And
of
just
how
that
to do
final
things.
point of ambiguity, Luke's lost his hand at the final.
Yeah.
They're on the deck of the Mon Calamari
Yeah.
ship, and they look into the distance.
Yeah, but
Yep.
they still have hope.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
There is that level of ambiguity,
Yeah.
ambiguity to it, and it's that perfect shot of Luke and Leia looking into the distance and knowing that they're going to find Han eventually.
Yeah.
They've lost Han, but they need to go and find him, and
Exactly,
that's the last
yeah.
note of the film, and it's gorgeous.
I agree with that. But I would say, I think the prequels, though, the themes in the prequels probably are, at least they're a lot more interesting to me. But,
Okay.
but
yeah.
I think they wouldn't be as interesting if we didn't have the context of
The original
all the
trilogy.
things set up in the original trilogy.
Just a bit more on the B plot as well, because that has
Yes.
stuff to do with where their journey goes, and then stuff to do with Lando. I think there's trust is really intrinsic to that. So
Okay.
Han and Leia learning to trust each other more.
They do. They
They-
do
yeah.
learn to trust each other a lot more throughout the course of that film. They become close and
Yeah.
friends, and they start making out.
Yeah.
you know?
They trust each other. They fall in love, and then here we present to them an obstacle:
Mm-hmm.
Lando Calrissian, untrustworthy.
Untrustworthy, very smarmy and slick.
Yeah.
God, I was watching
Yeah.
some of those clips the other day. I'm like, God, he's so fantastic in this movie.
So the message of Empire.
Message of Empire.
Hmm.
Let's nail it down. Okay.
Well, before we get to the message, I would like to say
Okay, go.
one last thing, because even though I don't think this is the theme of the movie itself, it does lead on to Episode 6 and Star Wars as a whole. But I think as a part of this idea of love and compassion, even for your enemies, being the path for the heroes, Episode 5 is all about how hatred leads to suffering, and that's most encapsulated by Luke.
Mhm.
I mean, his whole training on Dagobah is all about how to be a Jedi, how to accept the Force, but he ends up rejecting the wisdom of Yoda and Obi-Wan, goes to Bespin, and he's defeated because he caved into fear and this hatred of the enemy.
And his fear of losing his friends.
Exactly, yeah.
That fear led to
Yeah,
the hatred.
fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mine's about if you half-ass your path to self-improvement,
Mm.
if you're impatient, you will never become your best self.
Interesting. I think it's so interesting too because, Luke still succeeds. Like, it was the right choice for him to leave Dagobah and not complete his training because he wanted
Ultimately.
to save his friends.
But the thing is,
But he still lost. There was still
Yeah.
great
yeah,
consequences.
he learned a lesson. But had he stayed on Dagobah, been patient, continued to train, everything would have played out exactly the same.
Is that true?
Mm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
would Leia have escaped with the Millennium Falcon and Lando?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aside from the fact that, all Luke being there did was distract Darth Vader. As we see Darth Vader do in much of the films, he likes to march around and not really
Yeah.
fully engage with things himself and gets troopers to do that incompetently. So I think that, they still would
Yeah,
have gotten away regardless.
I agree with that because I feel like the whole message of Bespin is just the fact, that it's this massive defeat driven by the flaws of our heroes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
No, that's really cool. Yeah. Oh, okay. Let's.
Yeah.
I came up with. I was pretty happy with the one I did for A New Hope. I've actually got no idea what to do for Empire Strikes Back. It's just.
It's trickier.
Yeah.
If
it's
I
very
may
tricky.
spitball an idea,
Go
I
for it.
think the message may be the pathway to victory is paved with suffering and sacrifice.
That's pretty fucking
Ooh.
good. I like that.
That
I
seems like
that.
that's like a Clone Wars opening quote before
Yoda.
every episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I've got nothing. It'd just be along the lines of success or victory or overcoming challenge is more difficult when there's family involved. That's
Yeah.
really bad.
Yeah.
Kill me.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's about shedding, I guess, that black and white morality and blind trust in forces of good and forces of evil.
Yeah.
I mean, Luke's whole motivation up to this point in the series is that he views Darth Vader as the guy who killed his father.
Yeah.
It's pure evil, and he believes Darth Vader is this unredeemable force in the universe. And then all of a sudden he has to contend with the fact that his whole mission for vengeance is against his father.
Yeah, and his own family.
Yeah, exactly. And it tears the whole universe apart, really.
Fantastic film. 10 out of 10. Let's move on to a little bit less of a perfect film. Say,
My
Return of-
favorite Star Wars film.
Your favorite Star Wars film, Return of the Jedi, Episode 6. This one's really interesting because we've talked about this before. Obviously, the scene with Luke, Vader, and Palpatine in the throne room is one of the most iconic confrontations in any movie series ever. But the Han and Leia stuff gets left in the dust a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, this originally tied together the entire trilogy and was the epic conclusion. At the time, people were a little bit disappointed by the Ewoks, but I think overall it was positively received and people really loved the movie.
I like the Ewoks, but I think it should have been Kashyyyk.
Yeah, so it was originally Kashyyyk with
Yeah.
Wookiees, and then they changed it to Ewoks on Endor
Yeah.
to make it a bit more
Marketing,
family
yeah.
friendly and marketing. Yeah, it's
But,
an interesting story. But
Yeah, but I mean, Ewoks are cool.
now, what notes do you guys have to dive into here for Return of the Jedi?
So themes: redemption through sacrifice.
Mhm.
Let's come back around with this one. Love conquering hate. Finding self-resolution. Luke is kind of in a dark place all the way up until he takes Vader's hand and he realizes that okay, a Sith would continue to fight this, but I'm a Jedi. This is okay. And then importantly, found family and the bloodline that you choose to accept.
No, I think we really do get the thematic conclusion to this idea of family and loving your family so much that you can overcome any evil. Good versus evil, literally, like good wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good really truly does win. Luke fully embraces who he is. I am a Jedi like my father before me. One of the coolest lines ever. Still
Yes.
like come back to that line all the time. And you get that really satisfying conclusion there.
Yeah, I'd like to posit the theme of there is darkness within everyone, but there is also a light within even the darkest souls. And the reason I say that as well isn't just because it's very clear from Star Wars and all the things that Jedi talk about, but it's also Star Wars is based on Hero with a Thousand Faces, right? It's directly ripped from the hero's journey. But a lot of people don't really point out that the hero's journey is just ripped from Jungian psychology. And Carl Jung, one of the things he always talked about was this idea of the shadow and how everyone has these repressed flaws within them that we try to ignore. That's why it's the shadow. We don't see it. And when that's left unchecked, it manifests and it like swells up like a damned river. But what's really interesting in episode 6, right, is Luke, when we first see him, he enters donning full black, uses force
Force choke
chokes.
someone,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And the whole point of that is Luke has the exact same darkness within him that Vader has. It hasn't fully come out yet, but in the same point, Darth Vader has the same amount of light within him that Luke does.
And I think that Force stroke is a perfect setup for what happens later, where Luke is just wailing on his father with his lightsaber, or like
exactly,
he goes nuts. He really like hulks
Yeah.
out and goes and almost gives into the dark side, and then he stops and he realizes. And at that moment, does he only truly become like a light side character who has confronted the shadow within himself and overcome it, and throws down his lightsaber and says, "I am a Jedi like my father before me."
Yeah, exactly.
And truly good versus evil, good overcomes evil there.
On that notion of, seeing the darkness, I think for a character like Luke, like you can't just repress darkness. And I think that's what the prequels are all about. It's
Yes,
about
absolutely.
this dogmatic notion that you have to repress these
I'm
things.
so excited to dive into the prequels.
Yes. But in the case of Luke, he doesn't, in my opinion, he doesn't really become a Jedi until he sees that darkness within himself.
Yeah. And one final point there with Darth Vader, the Shadow, he has really embraced the Shadow. He has been evil for so many years now.
Yeah.
But even he has that spark of light within him,
Yeah.
and he is able to redeem himself and sacrifice himself for the greater good, tying that thematic conclusion as well, going back all the way back to Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope. He sacrifices himself, helps his son to overcome evil, and then dies sacrificing himself. And it's perfect. Perfect that
Yes.
thematic conclusion to all of
Full
that. And then Han and Leia. But
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, so there's your themes, your thematic analysis.
I've got one more thing, but
Okay.
we've been talking too much.
Oh no, I'm just ready to go into messages. I've really just speed ran my theme.
My one last note is for the Han and Leia. It's obviously not as well baked of a kind of end point to their story in the series. It's good. I like it, but it's not as good as like the incredible scene we get on the throne room.
Yeah.
But Han and Leia working with the Ewoks. The Ewoks are literally, had this pointed out to me a while ago by you guys. They are the flaw in Palpatine's plan. They help Han and Leia escape the Empire and defeat the Empire on Endor, which then helps them win the entire fight. So tiny sparks of hope overcoming great odds, I think, is amazing.
Small groups can defeat evil.
Small groups can defeat great evil.
I suppose there's also with that a sub theme, which is that quote again that overconfidence is a weakness.
Yeah, no, what's the
That's
full line?
Luke and
your-
Palpatine having a bitch fight. Your overconfidence is your weakness. Your
Yeah.
faith in your friends is yours.
Yes.
Which has never come around yet.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
We want to explore that specific line a little bit in the sequel trilogy if we get the chance to. But yeah.
That'd be cool. Messaging.
Messaging, what do you
Return
got?
of the Jedi. Love for the family you choose to love can save even those who appear beyond help.
Well, I think I already set it up in episode 5 discussion, but love and compassion, even for your enemies, is the path. Hatred only leads to suffering.
Yeah, I think just like speaking to like all of those points, your guys is kind of like in a writing class I took, it was the director's statement is kind of what you guys are hitting me with now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's when you try and like take all of the ideas and everything possibly presented in a film and squish it down into one
Boil it
line.
down to
one.
Which is, sometimes can be a reductive thing, but also can free you in a sense, in a writing sense. It's complicated.
Yeah.
It was, I don't fully understand it.
I've just because I didn't do film in high school. I did drama, and all of the theoretical assessments and analysis there is based around the dramatic meaning, which is the same
and
as the message.
the director's statement, dramatic
Yeah,
meaning. Yeah,
and that was like you got to go craft a 1,500 word assignment around why, if you're going to go break down anything, why it serves that one line.
Yes.
So it's, you know, it's your hypothesis.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah,
thesis
yeah.
statement, you've got to have. You know,
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I did drama as well, and that was so eye-opening to me. And to me, storytelling is all about philosophical conflict. What is the opinion or the philosophy at debate in this story?
Yeah.
And how does each side reflect that? And I think to me, Star Wars is, it's that notion of good versus evil. You have all these different viewpoints on whether or not it is black and white, whether or not it's gray. And that's what makes it so dramatically compelling to me.
Yeah. Awesome. So that is Return of the Jedi Episode 6 and the original trilogy. It's simple in a sense. It's like it's surface level, but if you do, there is space to dive in deeper to the themes and messaging and what's actually going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And I really love that.
Yeah.
Especially about the later 2 movies as well.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to add on that note of simplicity. Coming back to the whole idea of like Jungian psychology, like Jung always talked about archetypes and how in our stories, you know, we have these clear-cut figures of like mentors.
The 7 stories, right? That's his thing?
Yeah, the 7 archetypes.
Seven
Yeah,
archetypes,
yeah. I think there might be 9, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, and on that point, it's great stories can seem very simple, but it's through simplicity that you can derive very deep meaning.
I think we've covered the original trilogy pretty well. We've got a fair amount of time
Okay.
to dive into the prequel trilogy before we make it to the sequels and talk about what our themes are that we want to bring to those in our rewrite. But we're too excited about prequels. So let's dive into it and get through it as fast as we possibly can, even though there is so much to go into.
Phantom Menace. Oh, I've got to backtrack there. Hold on.
Okay.
Did I skip the... Someone else go.
I'm just going to quickly kind of give a bit of context. So in very stark contrast to the original trilogy, the style of the prequels is epic scale storytelling, with the story spanning over 20 years, encapsulating the rise of the separatist movement, the beginning and end of the Clone Wars, and the fall of the Republic. Huge, epic scope, massive scale, and very much for me falls into different categories of storytelling and different styles and themes. I feel like it's a love versus hate story, and it's a story about power and a story about society, which is very different to what we got in the original trilogy. Anyone got any notes for that?
No, I think that's great.
No, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Like anything
Nice.
to like build off of that.
Yeah.
Believing in the strength of individuals gives them power in the face of great doubt.
Mm.
So specifically talking about, you know, the belief in Anakin when the Jedi are saying, no, he's never going to be anything. Belief in Jar Jar when his society has rejected him.
Yeah.
Padme's belief that this small band of heroes can, you know, without the assistance of Coruscant, can take back and liberate their planet.
Yeah, no, Phantom Menace kind of does have a bit of a different thematic vibe in what's like trying to be said there, because I think Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith are 2 parts of one very big, very good story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Phantom Menace, a lot of people ask the question, why even write Phantom Menace? Why even make that the film? Because
Yeah.
it's almost like it starts before the actual beginning of the
Yeah.
story. It's
Yeah.
like Anakin's a child here. Why are we seeing Darth Vader as a little kid? It was very confusing at the time when it happened.
I like, for fair warning, Phantom Menace is probably my least liked Star Wars movie, but I do think it is very important because the prequels really explore all about how the Jedi went wrong, how
Yeah.
the galaxy fell. And honestly, Qui-Gon is the most important part of that.
Yes.
Because he's the one Jedi we see who kind of rejects the Jedi code, and in my opinion is the only one who actually explores his beliefs in the Force truthfully, because we see that the Jedi become very dogmatic, and even though, yes, they have thousands of years of wisdom behind them, it seems to me like it's wisdom that they themselves haven't uncovered. And, you know, Qui-Gon, he rejects it. He believes in compassion. He's the only Jedi who actually sees that Anakin is the chosen one, and that's really important to set up, in my opinion.
He's much more akin to Luke, you know? He's the Jedi that sees the good in people.
Yeah.
And sees the potential.
And understands the potential, like, it's complex. Human emotion and feelings and life is very complex, and it's not as simple as dogma. You cannot be Mace Windu. You cannot just say, here is the code is everything.
Yeah.
And anything outside of the code is wrong, and it leads to fear, to hate, to the darkness. And it just is not as simple as that, and you need to look outside of that to find truth and wisdom.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. And once again, I think we get this notion of black and white morality coming back up.
Yes.
Like, for one, obviously the Jedi are a big example of that, where anything that's susceptible to the dark side, they repress rather than acknowledge. And I think Anakin, to me, he seems like Luke gone wrong, because he starts off in a very similar place, obviously Tatooine being a big example, but he has this very black and white view of the world, being good and evil. And
He's a dumb little kid,
yeah, exactly.
size of a pumpkin.
Yeah, but that's precisely why he falls.
So yeah, I think Qui-Gon is like a really good character to look at if you're looking at the themes of the story, because it's so fascinating. He is the one character who looks outside of the Jedi code, who saw the prophecy just before, in canon, there's the book, and he finds the prophecy with Obi-Wan, right?
Yeah.
And that's just before the events of the Phantom Menace, and he's like at the very edge of discovering what Palpatine is up to, and then he fights Darth Maul, and then he dies.
Yeah, the person who's the wisest.
The person who's the wisest, and the one person who could have saved Anakin from his fall to the dark side.
That's the Jewel of the Fates.
And that's why it's the Jewel of the Fates. That's why it's the name of the song. And I've just got chills thinking about how bloody cool that is.
And in the grand scheme of like the prequels, people question, like, why does it exist? Why we go this far back in time? The beginning of Anakin's journey is the beginning of the end.
Yes.
From the get-go, the Jedi don't want him. They don't believe in him. Obi-Wan doesn't want him, except for the fact that he keeps a promise to, Qui-Gon, and the one person who believes in him dies.
Yes.
So.
And I think this really ties into what is a core theme in a lot of stories of power and society, which is the role of religion in society. And specifically, I think George Lucas was looking at probably the Catholic Church and their role and how ingrained they were in society for so many, like 1,000 years, 2,000 years, and how much they affected everything and how their dogma led to the fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, honestly, if you were to take that example, like Qui-Gon is like good Catholics who just believe in good morals.
Yes.
And then the Jedi are.
Like, let's look
the
not at the
institution.
dogma and the institution. Let's look at the core of the faith and what's trying to be said here.
Yeah.
And you realize, if Jesus was alive today, he'd be a socialist and he'd be brown.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people in America would kill him.
Yeah, I hope this gets to Texas.
I really hope it does too.
Yes.
And I've heard that. I've had that pointed out to me by much smarter people online. And it is that role of religion in society. It is Qui-Gon, and he would have been the one person who could have saved Anakin there.
Yes.
But it is specifically the Jedi Order at the time who gets in the way of the good outcome happening.
Yeah. And I have a couple points on that. I think on this idea of where is religion's role in society. The first point, which comes a bit later, is the fact that the Jedi Order become politicized and they try to get involved with politics. And I think Lucas is pretty clear that he's trying to advocate for a secular take on religion.
Yeah, separation of church and government.
Exactly, yeah. But also on the second point, I think it comes back to this notion of where does wisdom come from? Because Qui-Gon, all the lessons he's learned, he's discovered from himself. And although I agree that this is a criticism of the Catholic Church and stuff,
in part, it's not entirely, but
that's why I want to also raise, because this is something most people in the West don't really know. This is a very similar debate in Buddhism as well, because you get a lot of these temples and institutions that start to get powerful and kind of lazy spiritually, and they become dogmatic about teachings when the whole core of Buddhism really is just learn for yourself, take teachings that matter to you, and so on and so forth. And applying that to the Jedi, you see these Jedi who become very cozy. They don't really understand the teachings.
They're not in the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment.
Yeah.
They're in the pursuit of mastery of the Force.
Yes.
And mastery of their own power within society.
Exactly. And I think most importantly to add on that, they're not actually compassionate.
Yes.
Qui-Gon is. And later on in the prequels, when you start to see Anakin really grappling with his thoughts of Padme dying and all the other things that start to tear him away from the Order. Whenever he goes for advice, the Jedi are always like, death is a part of life and so on and so
Just
forth.
let go. Don't think about it. Yeah.
And even though that wisdom might be true, they're not actually meeting Anakin on the level that he is at the moment. They're not discerning what he actually needs in that moment.
In the simplest terms, he's a teenage boy who cannot regulate his emotions, and he needs help and support.
Yeah, and they're not compassionate.
Realize another theme within Phantom Menace, therefore.
Yeah, let's wrap up Phantom Menace. Take us out.
Expectation and pressure, because it's from that first film that they established, hey, we think that you're the chosen one, and when you think forward to then the other films, you're just like, so if he hadn't been the chosen one, he would have just been a Jedi. And if he'd been a Jedi who was just in love with Padme, then he could have rejected all this shit, gone down a good path, been in love, had a good life, poor guy.
Yeah.
But because he's the chosen one, all this expectation, all this pressure.
Yeah.
And there is also that element of the prophecy as well, and how that ties into the themes.
And I also think that idea of the chosen one, and although that also plays into free will versus fate, I think identities are an attachment, and that's something the Jedi don't realize. Because when the Jedi create this attachment to Anakin as the chosen one, they create expectations around him. They say, hey, this is what you need to be. This is where you're going to end up. And then all of a sudden when he acts out of line, because their idea of what he is, their attachment to his identity shatters, it causes suffering. That's one thing that I think Luke learns eventually on when he learns the lessons of Yoda. Oh, his appearance is deceiving. He's not just a great warrior. He's more than that. The lesson to learn is that the Jedi didn't actually understand what attachments were.
Yeah, they had a very reductive, simplistic idea of what an attachment is. So we do need to start moving on though, because we've got to get to the sequels at some point.
Cool.
The examples I found that fit for me in terms of other works of art that kind of fall into love versus hate and power in society is Romeo and Juliet and dystopian fiction like 1984. In Attack of the Clones, we see Anakin and Padme fall in love. We see Anakin confess his love to Padme. And then in the same vein as Star-Crossed Lovers, we see Anakin then choke and nearly kill Padme in Revenge of the Sith. And that is so Shakespearean. And then you see, I'm jumping ahead here, but you see Anakin fighting Obi-Wan, brother against brother. That is literally Shakespearean writing.
Yeah.
And that's the inspiration that he took. And I think Romeo and Juliet's a great way to look. Yeah. And then 1984 is much more of Palpatine's story and power and the role of religion and of the rise of authoritarianism. Yeah. And how that takes shape and how you can have war be used as a vessel for corrupting an entire society.
Yeah, no, I agree.
There's what I've got.
Yeah, no, dude, yeah. Revenge of the Sith is like Macbeth and a whole bunch of other things thrown together, and that's why it's awesome.
Yes, so good.
No, Attack of the Clones. Themes. Forbidden love, obviously. A lot of the marketing was all about that. Fear of the unknown. You know, Obi-Wan and the Jedi afraid of the Sith, so for DS, all those great mysteries, and then Anakin afraid of
the loss of his mother.
Yeah, his mother. Not knowing for so long what happened to her. If you give in too much to any emotion, your emotions will control you and your decisions.
Yes, and as much as we know, we think there was a condemnation of the Jedi's doctrine in this period, that is still true. If you give in to fear and anger, you will lose yourself to it.
Yeah, and I agree. That's why I think the whole Jedi Order and the prequels is so fascinating to me, because I feel like a lot of their wisdom is true, but they just don't know how to execute it properly.
It's like they've gone too far into the scale of, okay, if fear and anger leads you down the dark path, let's entirely remove ourselves from all emotions, including love and compassion.
Exactly, yeah, because that's the thing. There's even this line where Anakin's like, well, the Jedi say I can't love people, but they advocate for compassion. So is love not compassion? And I think that really...
And I think, also, fun fact, I think Ki-Adi-Mundi canonically fucks.
Because his species is
endangered, so he's got like a bunch of concubines or something.
Yeah, but it's no emotional attachment.
No emotional attachment.
Ki-Adi-Mundi, what are you getting up to today?
I got a lot of fucking to do.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So I just wanted to throw that in there because I just think that's a really funny...
hilarious. I've completely forgot about that.
I also hate Ki-Adi-Mundi because he's such a dick, and the idea of him having these poor ladies, or however their species reproduces, hanging around him and having this emotionless, soulless dickhead. Anyway, I don't like.
He is a dickhead. Look at that head.
Yeah. Oh my God.
We don't even insult the man's appearance, but
we'd like to formally apologize to Ki-Adi-Mundi. I
don't give a shit about your. What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
Sorry about that non sequitur. Let's get back to what you were saying, Cole.
What was I saying?
I'm sorry.
You give me one sec. Once again, we're coming back to attachments.
Yes.
And in the case of the Jedi Order, to draw back on the obvious parallels that Lucas pulls from like Hinduism and Buddhism and all that, when they discuss attachments, the idea isn't that you repress it. And much like in Jungian psychology, when you repress things, you're not actually getting rid of them. You're just turning a blind eye to them. So they'll grow within you. And that's why, sometimes when we get angry or frustrated, we're like, where did that come from? And it's because it's something within us.
There's a source somewhere.
Yeah,
like there's somewhere that's coming from, and you've got to, got to not repress these things.
Exactly. And it's why we also project so much onto other people. But in the case of the Jedi, they start to repress these things. They say, hey, don't like look at it non-judgmentally. Don't let it pass. Just don't even acknowledge it. And because of that, they turn a blind eye to so many things. It's one, why Anakin is able to kind of get away with that stuff. Two, it's why no one senses Palpatine coming back, because they're all blind and out of touch with the Force. And for Anakin, because they tell him to repress things, they don't actually teach him why the wisdom is important. Yeah. And honestly, I don't think they truly understand why.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Are we in Revenge of the Sith?
I think we're still in Attack of the Clones. Do you have anything to kind of like wrap that up before we move on to Revenge of the Sith?
I think we're hitting it on the head. They kind of flow into each other though.
They very much do.
Cause and effect.
Like I said earlier, I feel like they're two parts of a very long story. And it's one, it starts with the beginning of the Clone Wars, and then at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, we see the end of the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
So, jumping into Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
When I said earlier that I think the prequels has the best execution of thematic imagery and symbolism, there is two things in particular. The entire fight between Obi-Wan and Anakin on Mustafar is one of the most incredibly compelling thematic visual images I've ever seen. And literally fighting amidst lava in the wreckage of a burning castle or a burning factory. The industry that was the fulcrum of the entire war in pieces all around them that they are fighting on. Incredible.
Yeah.
And then the betrayal that Anakin feels against Obi-Wan coming to a head, and them fighting each other, and Anakin being cut into pieces and becoming a robot, becoming this horrible cyborg monster. And then we have Palpatine and Yoda battling in the Senate, and Palpatine literally using the chairs that comprise the Senate room, throwing them at Yoda as he destroys democracy in that final battle.
Yeah. Crazy.
unfucking believable. It's
Yeah,
insanely
it's so
good.
good.
And the music playing the whole
Um,
time. I think it's Duel of the Fates. And then the original song that
Battle of the Heroes. Yeah.
Battle of the Heroes as
Yeah.
well is playing on Mustafa. So oh my god.
I know, yeah. That's slight interjection. Sorry.
Go
but,
for it.
I remember when I was watching. I did a rewatch of the prequels like a year and a half ago, I think, and I was so definitely bored during Phantom Menace.
This pod race. God, what do you mean? It's a pod
I
race.
don't like the pod racing scene. It's cool, but it's
Wrong.
not for me. I know.
No, I'm joking. It's got no thematic or story
got-
meaning,
it's
but
got Jabba.
fuck, it's cool.
Although it sets up his piloting skills. Attack of the Clones. Surprisingly, I enjoyed it more. I still thought it was kind of boring, but the idea of Obi-Wan having a whole detective noir storyline
It's
is
fun as hell.
fucking
Oh yeah,
awesome.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wish they focused more on that.
Yeah.
But Revenge of the Sith, so well paced. Like,
It's a good
shockingly
movie.
well.
It's a really good movie.
Yeah,
I
I was-
stand by Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, I was like, where the hell was this the whole time?
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
like, even though I think, the dialogue's kind of shoddy and all that.
Oh,
and
yeah, still.
There's still a lot. The flaws of the prequels are there. It definitely is the best of the prequels. And to come over to the themes, an obvious one is if you value security and safety above all, tyranny will follow.
Hey, no, that's a really good point. And that ties back to talking about the rise of authoritarianism
Yeah,
and
and-
the role of religion and how that
Yeah.
all ties together. And people, they saw this war, and Palpatine did the war intentionally because he
Yeah.
knew how much that would destabilize everything.
Yes, and
he was fighting both sides. He was pitting both sides against
Yeah,
each
yeah.
other like Beyblades. And he saw how this would weaken everything.
Yeah.
And he saw how it would terrify people, and he wanted to use that fear to control them. So instead of prioritizing freedom, they wanted only safety and security. And
Yes,
that's why Palpatine won.
yeah, as you pointed out, it's that notion of fear again, right? And
Yes.
it's the fact that when people start to cave into fear and really grip onto it and hold onto it, you end up getting cases like Anakin where it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that Padme dies, that he turns to the dark side, all because he started to fear it. And because of that, he lost control of himself.
So I've got being forced to repress your emotions
Mm.
and ignoring problems can only lead to chaos.
I think something we've kind of forgotten to touch on as well is corruption and manipulation.
Yeah.
I think there's some really
Mm.
interesting dynamics between Palpatine and Anakin in so many of those scenes where he's manipulating him and even grooming in a
Yeah.
sense, because
Yeah.
it's been since Phantom Menace when he was a child that Palpatine has had this really strange relationship with Anakin, and it's just really disturbing. And then you get these scenes where it's so close to Anakin overcoming that manipulation,
Yeah.
where he's looking at it, he's like, "You're the Sith. You're the
Yeah.
one I'm supposed to kill," and he nearly does it. He nearly kills him, but he is just he's been corrupted
Yeah.
for so long, and through the lack of interest shown by the Jedi, the lack of care and compassion shown to Anakin,
Yeah.
that manipulation and that corruption succeeds.
Yeah.
And it's not his fault because he was a kid.
Yeah, but-
it really wasn't his fault.
Yeah, it's almost like a dark mirror of the whole message in the original trilogy where, appearances are deceiving, grey
Yes.
morality. But in Anakin's case, he's confronted with evil, but it's so much kinder to him than the supposed forces of good he always looked up to. And I think one of the scenes that always really fascinates me is right before they go to arrest Palpatine, and he tells Mace Windu that Palpatine is the Sith Lord. And Mace Windu's like, all right, stay here. And the implication is that when Mace Windu comes back, he's going to let Anakin onto the council. But the problem is that Mace Windu is always so cold.
It's too little,
so
too late.
heartless. Exactly, yeah. And he never even lets Anakin know that, like, all right, we're going to check this, and then, we'll consider you for the council.
Yeah, like I believe you, I trust you, you have to stay.
He does not say those words, does he?
No, I'm saying like, if he'd said that.
No, that's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah,
it.
yeah,
But
yeah.
what he
He's
says
like, "Stay
instead,
here."
he's like, "We don't trust you. We'll go check this out ourselves. You stay
Yeah.
here. You're too close to the case." Basically,
yeah,
is
yeah.
what he says to Anakin in that scene.
Yeah.
And then Anakin's like, "No," and
Yeah.
he chases them because he hasn't been shown the trust.
Exactly,
He hasn't
yeah.
been believed in
And-
by the council.
Yeah, and they're just not compassionate to him once
Yes.
again. And like on that whole notion, he wants access to the Jedi text so that he can save Padme. And that would never be a problem in the first place if the Jedi weren't repressing romance, love, or even if they were able to meet Anakin with at least a sense of empathy.
I think you need compassion. I think it's essential
Exactly,
to any
it's-
kind of functioning society or individual
Yeah.
relationship.
Exactly, and it's why Luke wins in the end, because he's
Has it?
compassionate.
Yeah, I had some things around, like corruption of the once pure, corrupted perspectives, seeking support in the wrong arms.
No, and yeah, just the corruption of Palpatine being there the entire time
Yeah.
and worming his way through the Senate. You get to watch his plan kind of form up. And I think a really great expression of that corruption is in his attempted assassination of Padme.
Yeah.
Because he goes through so many intermediaries. Does it make total sense? No. But the point is that he sent one person to send to one person to send one person to send a little squid, a little slug thing to go and kill Padme. And trying to trace that back for Obi-Wan was damn near impossible because this guy is so good and using intermediaries and working from the shadows and being that puppet master. And the whole time, he's right under their nose in the Senate, working his way up through the ladder to the top of the political hierarchy. That corruption, I think, is just fascinating to watch, and it's Palpatine's story. As much as it's Anakin's, I think it's Palpatine's story.
And then to link it back to, this will be our setup, then going forward into the original trilogy, failing your loved ones, failing your family. And that's from all perspectives. That's Anakin failing Padme, and Obi-Wan, that's Obi-Wan failing Anakin.
Yes, absolutely. He says, I have failed you.
Yeah.
It's the truth. That is exactly what George Lucas wanted to say, because he wrote it in dialogue, and that's how we know. Because he tells us. It's great.
So
on the nose.
No, if you're interested in learning more about Lucas's approach to dialogue, which I'm not saying is like perfect by any means, there's a really great video essay called George Lucas, the Master of Wooden Dialogue. Yeah. It's so uncivilized. We love that guy. He does some really great breakdowns. It's a very, very good video.
Yeah, I remember watching that a while back, and even though I don't know if I fully agree with the hypothesis, I think it is a great video.
It definitely gave me a lot of perspective onto, it's not necessarily like, it doesn't make it good, but it definitely changes my opinion and gives me a bit more respect for the writing.
I mean, like, Lucas is a very heavy-handed storyteller. He does not really hide his themes under subtext or anything like that.
No.
It's very clear-cut.
So, just one last note before we use this to springboard into our themes for the sequels, and also a criticism of what the sequel themes currently are. We have always had the opinion that the original trilogy is a trajectory for Luke upwards towards like a true paragon of good. He starts, middling, whatever, kind of a bit selfish and a bit arrogant, and he ends the story rejecting his shadow and fully taking in the light and being a paragon of good. The opposite is the true for Anakin. He starts the story as a very happy-go-lucky kid and ends Darth Vader, and that's the end of his story, and it's a full trajectory downwards for him. And I think what we've talked about a lot is doing with our sequel trilogy, we want to have it a bit more in the middle. We don't want it to be one line up or down. We want it to be a bit confusing, how reality really is. But before we talk about that, we want to criticize the actual sequel films and what they did wrong with their themes. So, does anyone want to start? I got a funny little thing, but...
Yeah.
I suppose this is more of a criticism and an idea. I think really what the sequel should be about is a defense of, like, putting all the lessons learned from the prequels and the original the original trilogy, putting them to the test.
Yeah, for sure.
And defending them. So, when we get democracy returned, it has to defend itself against fascism.
Yes.
When Luke learns all this spiritual wisdom, he has to learn that it will come under criticism. It won't.
There is no one final solution.
Yeah,
it has to
exactly.
evolve.
Yep. Yeah, but it's even though that faith is that wisdom is true, I think it needs to be tested.
Yes,
to prove it's true.
Absolutely. I have some very quick notes here. What went wrong with the sequel's themes? Force Awakens has no theme. The Last Jedi has too many themes, and The Rise of Skywalker made me forget what themes are, as well as a bunch of other brain cells that I'll never get back.
So the thing is, it was very easy for me to find themes, very face value themes for Force Awakens, but the message.
Okay.
I didn't think there was any driving message in Force Awakens.
No, I definitely didn't feel that way when I was thinking about it.
Exist. Awakening to your own potential. Very obvious in the title.
Yeah.
Internal conflict, the found family stuff, rejecting versus accepting family ties, that sort of thing. But as for the message, the closest thing I could find was something along the lines of like, your friends are the family you choose and they are worth fighting for. Something really just basic. There's nothing really going on there.
Yeah, no, there really isn't a whole lot to dive into beneath the surface of Force Awakens. I think it is a very shallow and unfulfilled story.
Yes, I agree. I'm going to play devil's advocate. I think that there are some clear-cut themes to The Force Awakens, even though I don't agree that they're explored well enough in depth. But I mean, one, obviously, this is the core theme of the sequels. It's legacy. How do people of like our generation, for example, look in the past? We get Kylo, basically just cosplaying and stuff.
He's a fanboy, yeah.
Yeah, we get like Rey looking at Han Solo with like, oh my God, you're the rebel hero and all that. Yeah, and people are forced to contend with the past, and that the fact is that the past does change. Our heroes often aren't as perfect as we...
Yeah, like never meet your heroes kind of thing.
Yeah, which is kind of whole thing about The Last Jedi, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is definitely a theme of The Last Jedi that we're going to talk about. Yeah. You got anything more?
No, not for Force Awakens.
Yeah, I think we can wrap up Force Awakens there. I'm not a big fan of Force Awakens. The more I watch it, the less I like it.
The problem with the sequels can be encapsulated with the fact that The Force Awakens just resets everything.
Yes.
Because, like, one theme I think is important is the idea that everything changes. Nothing is ever the same, and that's kind of like the lesson Luke learns, right? That appearances are deceiving, people change, so on and so forth. Redemption.
Yes.
The sequels, they try to say that, but then they kind of just go back to the way it was in Episode 4.
Last Jedi. The real thumper, the real big ticket item.
I mean, it's very clear cut. A failure is very, very present.
I do love
the
the theme of failure. I like how it's explored.
Yeah, for sure. just how it's explored. You know,
Yes,
It's
There are
like-
definitely some missteps for sure.
Yeah, but no, I think it's very obvious. Like the messages surrounding you, like only from learning from your mistakes can you grow. You know, Like,
Yes.
you have to
Mm.
fail to succeed.
And I think, even Kylo Ren's story takes that as well. And,
Yeah.
and his relationship with Snoke is actually interesting, and the idea of failure and how he failed in the first movie
Mm.
and how pathetic Snoke sees him as now, and how much Kylo Ren is like, well, I don't even care. I came here because I was rebelling against my parents, and now you are just being a parent to me now.
Yeah.
Why should I even care about any of this? I want to move past this, but he's moving past it in like
Yeah.
in the evil, like negative direction.
Yeah.
I think that also plays into the whole, once again, the idea of identity and
Yes.
who we are. Because, for the past 2 trilogies, we've seen these characters forced to grapple with like these titles they've been given, these identities. And in The Last Jedi, we see these characters who, in episode 7, have these very clear identities on who they are. And all of a sudden, they either reject it or are forced to contend with the fact that they don't have those identities. So,
In Last Jedi?
yeah.
So
So-
Force Awakens, they have these identities.
Yeah,
There's
like-
no question of who they are.
Yeah.
But then Last Jedi,
Yeah.
all of a sudden there
Exactly,
is the question.
right? You've got Rey, who suddenly learns that she's not special
Yes.
at all. No parents.
She has no interesting lineage or legacy
Yeah, and-
that's influencing her story. She just
Yeah.
exists and is super powerful.
Yeah, and Kylo Ren as well, he just rejects the notion that he's the next Darth Vader.
Yes.
Destroys the mask, which they reforge. and
Which they ended up reforging in the
Ah,
Rise of Skywalker.
yeah.
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 Like, to go back on a tangent, I think the problem with episode 9 is that it just backtracks on everything that The Last Jedi says. So,
Have you seen 9 now?
No.
Okay, right. No, I just wasn't sure.
just-
We've just
Um,
filled him in over time.
I know.
Yeah, fair
I-
enough. Yeah, no, it's similar things around identity. Like it's like seeking and achieving purpose and then personal identity. Because
Yeah.
even though episode 8 with Finn just repeats his journey in episode 7 of finding something worth fighting for, we're just like that's what he did in
Yeah.
the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
There's elements of sacrifice and living to fight another day. I think that's quite common across
Yeah.
Rose and Poe's.
Living to
sort of
fight another
stuff.
day's there,
Yeah.
and then Luke, coming back to Obi-Wan's sacrifice from A New Hope, he goes
Yeah.
and sacrifices himself in
Yeah.
what is very contentious of his death.
Yeah, but then again for the promise of living to fight another day. So that
Yeah.
the rebellion can continue.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like, there's this theme that I wish I liked in The Last Jedi, and it's this idea of non-violence. And I think I've since come around to it with Luke, because at the time I did not like the fact that he does not properly duel Kylo. I kind of like the fact that now he, like, by the end of the film, when he's self-actualized, he realizes that violence is not the answer, hate's not the answer, and basically relearns the lessons of the original trilogy. So that fight where he doesn't even strike a blow on Kylo, I think that's really cool.
I love
just-
that as well.
I know. I just don't think it's executed fully well.
It is all these things where it's like, oh, this moment works, I really
Yeah.
love this. As a whole package, it fails. But there are moments where, like you said, he doesn't land a hit on Kylo at all.
Yeah.
I think that is, that should be how he starts episode 7 for us in our rewrite, is he has self-actualized.
Yes,
he has
I
achieved
agree.
good, and he needs to prove that, yes.
Yeah.
But he is not the point of the story. We've had his story.
Yeah, yeah,
There are
yeah.
people who are deeply flawed and need to overcome those flaws, and I don't think it's Luke, personally.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's
yeah.
how I
No,
wrote.
that's fair.
That's-
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree. And I think, honestly, the way Luke should be treated thematically, at least, is the lessons he learnt. It's now time for people to try and learn that themselves. And
He's a teacher. I want him to be a
exactly,
teacher.
yeah. And when he has this idea, that the universe is full of balance, everyone can be redeemed, even the most evil. I mean, he saved Space Hitler, basically.
Exactly.
What does the average person think about that, right? How would Rey think? How can people be redeemed when they've committed such atrocities? How can you think that there is hope in the galaxy when there's so much suffering all the time? And I think that needs to be explored.
I think that can be the perspective of Hux and the First Order and that part
Exactly,
of the
yeah,
Galactic
and-
Senate.
Yeah, and even I think that should be Rey's challenge, or
Absolutely.
whoever Luke too does. Just to end my note on the idea of nonviolence, I think where it fails is Crate, because you get the scene where Finn tries to sacrifice himself, and then all of a sudden Rose stops him.
Rose crashes the ship into him.
Yeah.
And
Just
what
stop it.
should have
Should've
happened,
killed them.
they both die
Yeah.
in a fire explosion.
Yeah, and then as she gives this whole speech about, love and acceptance and not hating, right behind them, the rebel base, boom.
Yeah.
yeah, what
like-
the fuck?
Yeah, and I'm like,
What the fuck's all that
yeah,
about?
and listen,
Poor
like,
Finn.
I love those ideas, but firstly, I don't like Rose's character. So it's kind of just, she comes off as a really creepy fangirl who reminds me of stalkery people. And also, yeah, it's just the fact that as they advocate for love for each other, she willfully lets the base explode and risks the life of everyone.
That she does. What a film. What
Hmm.
an interesting case study The Last Jedi is. And I like I always say, I love Last Jedi. It's deeply flawed, but I enjoy it the most out of the sequel trilogy. It's one of my favorite Star Wars movies, despite its many, many flaws and the things that it ruins. Like, it for sure ruins some
Yeah.
shit. But oh well. Let's move on, I think.
Time for those Skywalkers to rise.
So, the themes of Rise of Skywalker. I think we should skip this.
There are, believe it or not, you can try and scrape some shit out
I
of
want to hear you try.
So I'll scrape some shit out of the fire right now. Defying familial expectations. Yeah.
Okay. Where is that?
Ray.
Ray, who's... Oh, because
Palpatine.
Palpatine's
But she's also
granddad.
Ray Skywalker.
She's also Ray Skywalker.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
The strength of community.
Yep.
Yep.
Mm.
And redemption through sacrifice again.
There
It's
are
bad.
more of us. Mo.
Yeah.
There are more of us.
Um,
What a fucking line.
Yeah, and I thought, you know what, I'll have a go at taking a message away from this if I can. And I was like, you are who you choose to be, not who your bloodline expect you to be.
Yeah.
You know,
That's nice.
that's there.
See,
Anyway,
anyway, let's move on. Oh,
Yeah.
God. I don't want to think about Rise of Skywalker more than I have to.
Great evil will always come back
So, there is that. There is, somehow Palpatine returned.
somehow.
There is something to explore there, I think, personally.
I
I think
think so.
evil will always come back and overcoming your own bloodline. So, themes and messaging and our versions of the story and what we want to do with it.
Okay.
Where do we want to start this one?
I want to start politically, where I always want to start.
Okay, yeah, of course.
The prequels are about here was the problems of church and state being united, and the original is the fallout of that, where it's it's only state and there is nothing left in the universe with what was good about that that church and the messages presented.
Yeah.
Then if here's our new bad guys are defeated, we're going to rebuild the Jedi Order, we're going to rebuild the Republic. How do those two things coexist?
So yeah, that's the question. So I've got my first thing on the list here is fear of specifically the return of authoritarianism, and that's something that we see a lot now in like the modern world. We look at the United States and we look at a bunch of places in Europe and we go, "Holy shit, that's scary," especially knowing about World War II and Hitler.
Yeah.
And all of that authoritarianism stuff. And then there's also the role of religion in society
Yeah.
and how to balance that. That's where I started.
Yeah.
And then I also, looked at that, big list of themes and thematic storytelling. And it's, for me, what I'm leaning towards in our rewrite. I want to tackle courage, like a tale of courage, a tale of good and evil, and a tale of society,
Yep.
which is a bit of an interesting mix of the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, which
Yeah.
is what I believe it should be.
Well,
I
it should,
agree.
yeah, we have to look at the holistically all of Star Wars that came before.
I don't
Yeah.
want it to be a tale of love and hate, which is the Shakespearean one. I don't want it to be about those kind of like jealousy and forbidden love and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
that doesn't fit right. But I do think it's a
story.
tale of society, and I think exploring society through Leia and Hux and Lando and how the Jedi and the Senate interact and what that journey looks like. I really want to dive into that a lot.
Learning from the mistakes of the past is something that I'm really gunning for.
Yes.
One of the things I see is like the theme of when the solution is so hard, is the better answer just to go back to how it was. So I think in the context of anyone who sympathizes with the Empire, right?
You're a fuckhead.
Yeah, you're a
Sorry.
fuckhead. You're a fascist. Eat shit. But as this new liberal democracy emerges, and from the ashes of war, obviously there's going to be so many struggles, right? It's led by people who've only really seen war for like the last 30 years.
Yeah.
So there are going to be mistakes. And when those mistakes start to happen, most people are going to be like, well, this is shit. This is not going to work. Let's go back to the way it was. This idea of, do we go back to tradition or do we progress? And I think that needs to be the crux of the political side of it.
And that is literally in today's world, conservatism and progressivism.
Yeah.
Is progressivism, is that a thing? Anyway.
Yeah.
So it is that, that divide.
Yeah. But I would also like to add on that notion that I think the idea of compassion in general should play into the political side.
Oh yeah.
So the way I see it is it should start with, this polarized environment where, yes, the fascists are clearly the ones in the wrong and there is a good side. However, fascism has risen because there's been this neglect and repression of certain elements, like maybe overlooking the outer rim, for example. And stuff like that.
Exactly. And I think, something that we talk about a lot is no one is the villain of their own story.
Yeah.
Everyone is the hero of their own story. And if you're going to write a compelling villain, they have to be their own hero. They have to be the hero in the story that they're telling themselves. And trying to do that compellingly leads you more towards something like Clone Wars and less towards something like the prequels and Palpatine.
I want to talk about explore the ongoing fight against evil, but breaking down what evil actually means.
Yes.
And just the whole idea that's everything's not all hunky dory after you defeat the Empire, same as everything's not all hunky dory after you defeat the Nazis.
Yes.
If you ignore the same shit, then it's gonna come back.
I think
if you ignore history,
the
it's gonna
thematic
return.
statement that I've had in my head for a while now is that you should strive for balance. But what balance is a constant fight against evil. Because that's all it is.
Yeah.
Evil is always going to return. Evil's always going to come back.
Yeah.
And if you want to find balance, you have to just fight against it forever.
I think we're all quite aligned on I don't know who in the Star Wars world where they've landed with what their stories are and stuff like that, but balance isn't one good for one evil.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also on the notion of balance. Sorry if I interrupted.
No, not at all.
I think as well, balance, it shouldn't be something that happens instantaneously. And I think the way that the sequel should reframe the trilogy is that balance is something that actually happens over lifetimes.
Yeah.
And that should be Luke's belief, right? Because he's come to understand that, but no one else sees it, right?
Yeah. There's a good Lincoln quote, I think, of like the long arc of history bends towards justice.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah,
I got it right.
That's the thing. Yeah, I think
If it's not, then that's a good quote anyway.
yeah.
I think it's Lincoln.
my quote.
It's a Bryce Quinn original.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a good quote, and it's just if you look at the long shape of things.
Yeah,
and I think Andor does a really good job of showing this as well. It's
amazing.
just like this rebellion and the guy. I can't remember his name, but it's the guy who's leading the rebellion.
Stellan Skarsgård.
Stellan Skarsgård's character.
No, just his name is Stellan Skarsgård.
He devotes his entire life to this because he's like, I know what I've done. I know what I've condemned myself to. Luthen, thank you.
Such a good character.
And I know that I will never see the sunrise of freedom that I yearned to bring to other people. And I know the horrible things I've done to not deserve even seeing it.
Yes.
Oh my God, I
Honestly,
love Andor so much.
Andor is such fuel for the soul.
Oh my God, right?
It's thematically so dense, and I love it. And I think, that whole notion of when you actually see the Rebel Alliance, the shady shit they did, and also the actual battle they were up against. It's like, holy shit, Luke's victory is like crazy.
It's really interesting, and having a faction in government say, hey, so the government was actually toppled by a terrorist insurrectionist movement is not incorrect.
Yeah.
That is what happened.
Yeah, and
it would be really interesting if in this film we did what the originals didn't, what all of the extra content in the originals did. It was like, what level of compromising on your morals does it take to defeat evil? Like, what level of
can you become
evil?
Can you still be good and defeat evil?
And where's the line?
And I want to really dive into that with Leia. That's the character I want to have that lens put on.
Nah, for sure.
Yeah. One of the things that fascinates me the most about that is I'm always asking the question, how did the Empire transition into the New Republic, right? Because if you think about it logistically, most of the members of government in just general roles, right, would have to transition into the New Republic. So they would have to rehabilitate Imperials.
Yeah. Well, like the big staffing bodies, it's like, so the Empire went and put in a governor to be in control of every planet. That's the ruler. Okay, so obviously you remove them and maybe people close to them. But then you've still got their staff of 200 people on that
the
planet.
civil servants.
Exactly.
You've got to keep them so society doesn't fucking crumble, but you've got to make sure that money talks, let's be real. That's the only way you fix that is just be like, don't do evil shit and we'll pay you more,
But it's so fascinating because what does that mean, right? Because what I envision, is Mon Mothma, when she's transitioning, she has to make this difficult choice to not punish 90% of the Imperials, you know?
Well, that's why, we've posed the idea of you need this Nuremberg trials thing within the Star Wars universe where it's like people who were truly terrible deserve jail or death or some sort of justice. But
and I think this comes right up onto the theme of the greater good,
Yeah.
which we need to explore in the sequels because how do you navigate such a complex and difficult situation where you have the Empire and they control society, you overthrow the Empire, and now you need to control society? How do you do it without returning to that same
exactly.
evil?
You know
I
what we
agree,
should do? Make more than 3 films.
No.
New Andor.
Because at the core of it, I want to just touch on this briefly. We're talking a lot about politics and really big, wide, broad stuff. But at the end of the day, we want to make 3 family adventure stories. And that will center around main characters exploring their role in the galaxy and trying to overcome evil. And they will not be this huge exploration of society and politics definitely not shooting for the stars the way the prequels did.
Yeah, but they're one story, of an individual character could be symbolic of that.
Exactly.
That's the thing, I think with Star Wars, it needs to have these lessons that are so big and stuff that a child can understand it. So I think, you need these clear-cut archetypes of evil, good, so on and so forth. That's why, the imagery of the rebels, the Empire, it's so clearly good and evil.
And there's a reason it's so iconic.
Yeah. But because of these clear visuals, then you can tell very ambiguous messages.
I think one of the best examples of that and using big imagery that is symbolic and iconic is the clone trooper armor becoming stormtrooper armor. Because you watch the Clone Wars as a kid growing up, you're like, fuck, I love clones. I know so many of these guys' names. I'm with them. And then you see Order 66, they betray them. The clones get phased out, and the same armor is used in the same style to become stormtroopers who are fascists. And it's that shift is so interesting and complex, but children still understand it.
Exactly.
So then, visually you go into in the sequels, it's like you either fully remove something like that within the universe, any sort of white armor, and then should it ever come back up again, what does that mean? Seeing white armor, what does that represent?
And how do you use that to tell an interesting story?
I agree with that. And I think as well, I forgot what I was gonna say.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Something to do with balance. That will come back to me.
Yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to touch on that. Just the idea that we know how deep and complicated and over the top some of these themes and ideas can go when you're exploring them. But at the end of the day, we really want to make just 3 concise, really good stories and tell them in script form, ideally over audio format.
Yes. Yeah.
And also, like, we'll probably put the scripts out as well. So.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to say. I think on the notion of balance, one of the things we should see as well is just the cause and effect over a long period of time.
Yeah.
So, I think we should see, like, one, I think the sequel should be kind of a union of the original trilogy and the prequels.
Yes.
Where we, like, finally see this universe come together, because they do feel like 2 separate, like, they're 2 separate
They're
eras.
2 very different stories in the same universe.
Yeah, and
it's
hard.
It's very strange.
It's hard to see them as, like, one cohesive story sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think the sequel should kind of build in the world where we actually feel that it is the same.
Yeah, and kind of bridge that gap in a sense.
Yeah, and as well as that, if we're building up the idea of struggle, going over a long period of time, there should be long-term consequences from things in the past. So maybe, when they integrate the Empire, maybe they were too casual about it, right? For lack of a better term. And maybe later on down the line, that's why, the Empire can come back.
But even being too harsh in those sort of things, like, that has its own repercussions.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, getting to the end of the show, I've got one kind of interesting, small, minor question, but it presents a lot of interesting thoughts. What should the time gap be between each film? Because the original trilogy has very small time gaps. It's a year and then 3 years between the 2 films. And then the prequels has, I think it's like 10 years or something crazy between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, and then pretty long, I think 3 years between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Is that correct? Something around that line.
Yeah.
So that's, one epic scope of around 20 years, and then original trilogy is like, it's 5 years.
5 years.
I think is the span of the whole original trilogy.
Pretty well.
And I think I would like to see ours fall somewhere in the middle there. It's hard to imagine that now just with what I've written for the first episode treatment, but I'll probably have to change it anyway. So
well, no, I do see our trilogy taking place over a decade.
A decade. Okay.
Yeah, from basically where we start 7 to where we end 9.
Which is pretty much in the middle between 5 years versus 20. I think a decade to around there.
Yeah, and it's just because it's like then in universe and within the characters' lives, I want time to establish things and for them to grow in a realistic way.
Yeah. I think there should be a big gap between the original trilogy and the sequels. In terms of in between each movie, I don't know how long they should be. I think it depends on the story, but I do think there should be gaps between each film.
Oh, there will absolutely be gaps. We really hate the decision in The Last Jedi to begin directly after The Force Awakens because no other Star Wars movie does it, and we don't think it ever should.
Yeah,
these are saga stories. They don't need to be told that way.
And also, like, as a Doctor Who fan, just one thing that sucks to me is when you have doctors who don't have gaps, so then expanded universe writers can't put anything
then
anywhere.
there's also expanded universe writers who get fucked over.
Yeah, and one of the things I really want to see for the original trilogy is what the hell happened between both 4 and 5 and then 5 and 6. Because there's so much that happened there.
You gotta read the comics, mate. There's a lot of great shit.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's really good. Yeah.
But yeah, so that was my kind of like closing question. And I think something like food for thought for us. And potentially, if you've got any comments, dear listeners, you can send them in and tell us your thoughts. But I think that's going to be the show for today, guys. Unless we've got any final thoughts?
Nah.
I think one question, just like, what do you see the tone of the end of 9 being? Like, if you got an audience member to leave our version of 9, what do you want to feel?
One word, Mello. Hope.
Hope? Okay.
I honestly believe that episode 9 should be the end of it all. It should be the mission statement of the entire series.
Yeah.
And I think it should be a resolute ending. Because
I completely agree.
Yeah, it sucks to me, right? Because episode 6 already leaves us with, hope that they're going to build the New Republic, that things are going to happen. So you kind of want more. I don't want another trilogy after 9. No. Sorry, Disney.
Here's my perspective on it, and I think I mentioned this last night, Mello. So to me, the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy are very much like Toy Story 1, 2, and 3. They're a perfect trilogy. You don't need any more. Yeah. But the sequel trilogy could be Toy Story 4. Which is a very, very good movie that expands on the ideas presented before and tells a new and creative story. You don't need anything after that. Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's the perspective I've taken on the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, because there is still so much story to tell, but I think that should be it, honestly.
Yeah, no, I want it to feel very bittersweet in terms of like, you wish, you do really wish there could be more, but it's like, that's it.
Yeah.
You can never do anything beyond this.
I want it to feel conclusive. And I want it to feel, I really want to land on the sense of like, balance has been brought to the Force.
Yeah.
Like we really feel it now.
Yeah, honestly, the way I see it is I think the sequel should kind of be like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And honestly, episode 9 should be Return of the King.
Okay.
I love that.
Well, that's
the tall order.
We should be able to hit that. I think that'll be easy. Yeah.
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, Thank you so much, dear viewers and listeners, however you've enjoyed the show. This has been Fixing the Sequel Trilogy. Find us on everything, not Twitter/X anymore because I don't like that. But everything else. So Spotify, Instagram, we've got a link tree with all of our different links and stuff. So go check all those out. Give us 5 stars and everything. Give us a like, subscribe, etc., etc. But until next time, may the Force be with you.